Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So I've been wanting to try something different. I've always wanted to watch Buddhist theme movies and then, dissect them, analyze them, break them down from my perspective and see what aligns and what doesn't align with the Buddhist teachings. So this series is going to be called Buddhism on Screen, and it's essentially part film commentary, part personal reflection, and part film breakdown. Whether it's subtle teachings on compassion, on rebirth, on impermanence, I'll be diving into it all. So today we're kicking things off with the Burmese Harp, which is a post-Second World War Japanese film that was originally released in 1956. It's packed with Buddhist undertones. It's quiet, it's emotional, it's very impactful. So let's get started. The film begins with the barren landscape of the Burmese countryside. The story follows a platoon of Japanese soldiers fighting in the Burma campaign near the end of the Second World War, just before and after Japan's surrender. Our protagonist is Private Mizushima, a musically inclined soldier who has learned to play the Burmese harp. Mizushima's harp, the traditional Burmese song, comes to symbolize the fragile thread of humanity amid the chaos of war. This group of soldiers sings together, using music as a source of strength and morale. The platoon is led by Captain Inoue, a former music teacher, and his background is evident in how well they sing. After making their way across the harsh terrain, the platoon seeks refuge in a small village. They are well fed by the villagers and are about to thank them with a song of gratitude when they notice something is off. It doesn't take them long to deduce that they have been deceived. They are surrounded by the British, who are hiding in the bush outside. In an attempt to deceive the British into thinking that they are unaware of their presence, Captain Inoue devises a plan. The platoon begins singing to the Japanese version of Home Sweet Home and uses the distraction to quietly retrieve their ammunition outside. The platoon is one command away from rushing out into a suicidal attack on the British when, to their utter astonishment, the British begin to sing back to them in English. Eventually, the platoon surrenders without bloodshed, learning that the war has ended 3 days earlier. Mizushima is approached by a British captain with a difficult request to talk down a group of Japanese soldiers who are still holding out on a mountain, refusing to surrender. Due to his calm, gentle, and compassionate nature, Mizushima agrees. At the base of the mountain, he is given an enormous task.
Persuade them to surrender. But remember, the notice is only for 30 minutes.
When Mizushima reaches the mountain, his mission proves dangerous. His fellow countrymen nearly shoot him, not recognizing him at first. Upon identifying him as Japanese, he's allowed onto the mountain and is soon approached by their commander. Mizushima informs them that the war is over and urges them to lay down their arms. Despite his pleas, the commander and his army decide unanimously to continue fighting to the end. Mizushima begs them to reconsider, but his words fall on deaf ears. Desperate, Mizushima tries to buy more time and decides to create a surrender flag to signal a temporary ceasefire. However, this gesture backfires. The soldiers misinterpret his action as betrayal, believing him to have surrendered on their behalf. In their anger, they beat him unconscious. Tragically, the mountain cave is soon bombarded by British forces. When the dust settles, Mizushima is the sole survivor, physically unharmed but deeply shaken. What follows is one of the most haunting scenes in post-war cinema. Mizushima alone, among the bodies of the fallen, confronted by the devastating cost of war and the weight of being left alive. 10 days have passed, and Captain Inouye's platoon remains in a POW camp in southeastern Burma, still uncertain of Mizushima's fate. While repairing a bridge, they spot a passing monk with a parrot on his shoulder, one who bears an uncanny resemblance to Mizushima. On the way to the camp, Captain Inoue and his platoon chance upon the house of an elderly fruit vendor who's been frequently visiting them, if she has heard any news of Mizushima. She tells him that the man from his unit who went up the mountain likely died there. The platoon, stricken with silent grief, assumes Mizushima has perished. Then they encounter a parrot similar to the one they had seen with the monk. The woman explains that her husband had captured several wild parrots in the forest and had given one to a monk who had asked him for directions. Captain Inoue trades his watch to buy the unsold bird, holding onto it as a living reminder of Mizushima. Meanwhile, Mizushima is being nursed back to health by a monk in a cave. When he notes that 5 days have passed, the monk replies with one of the most profound lines in the film. The monk's words stay with Mizushima and later on marks the beginning of his profound transformation. After recovering while the monk bathes in the river, Mizushima steals his caretaker's robes. He shaves his head, puts on his robes, and begins his journey across Burma's harsh, rocky terrain, starving, bruised, and exhausted. A farmer notices him and offers a bundle of rice as alms. Mizushima then asks the layman for directions to Mudon and begins heading south. As he traverses rocky valleys and dense jungles, he stumbles upon the corpses of fallen Japanese soldiers scattered across the landscape. Shocked and deeply disturbed, he pauses to give some of them a proper burial. Each encounter with the dead weighs heavier on him, and by the time he reaches the delta on the banks of a river, he finds a horrific sight. A mound of Japanese corpses piled on the beach. Overwhelmed, he breaks down, running along the shore with his hands in his face. He spots a boat and quietly boards it, continuing his journey to Mudon. Along the way, he comes upon a monastery. Still disguised as a monk, a novice welcomes him and gives him a fresh set of robes. As he sleeps, the sound of a sound, the Burmese harp, wakes him up. He sees a young boy playing the harp and asks if he can try playing. He plays it with a melancholic, almost mournful tenderness. Later, during a stroll near the monastery, Mizushima witnesses a group of British soldiers and nurses gathered at a mass cemetery, singing hymns to honor the dead. The scene of their collective mourning, their dignity in tending the fallen, becomes a turning point for him. Mizushima leaves the monastery and continues south toward Mudon. Along the way, he crosses the bridge where his former platoon is working, tying in with the scene earlier in the movie. He forces himself to walk past, pretending not to recognize them. The scene then shifts to a breathtaking view of the Shwedagon Pagoda, arguably Myanmar's most sacred Buddhist site. The pagoda is believed to enshrine the relics of the Buddha himself, including 3 past Buddhas. A funerary procession is held, led by Buddhist monks, for the fallen soldiers. Both the British and Japanese soldiers attend to pay their respects. Mizushima is among them. The platoon sees him again, the same monk they had seen earlier on the bridge and at the pagoda, but they're still uncertain if it's really him. That night, Captain Inoue trains the parrot he had bought from the vendor to say, "Mizushima, let's go back to Japan." Convinced that the monk is Mizushima, Inoue keeps asking the British officers about his whereabouts and refuses to give up. One of Inouye's officers advises him to let go, warning that doubting Mitsushima's death could dishonor his spirit and further harm the platoon's mental state as well as his own. The soldiers meet the elderly vendor again, and one of them asks her to deliver Inouye's parrot to the monk if she happens to see him. The next day, they wake to the news that Mizushima is waiting outside the camp fences. To confirm it's really him, they sing a song, and Mizushima responds by playing the harp. Afterward, he hands the harp back to the boy, bows, and walks away. The vendor then gives them a letter from Mizushima, addressed to Inoue. One officer urges him to read it immediately in case Mizushima has changed his mind about returning to Japan, but Inoue says Mizushima has already made his choice. The following day, the Japanese soldiers leave the camp and board a ship bound for Japan. On board, Inoue opens Mizushima's letter and reads it aloud to the platoon.
語り歌いたいと思っているか分かりません。どれほど日本に帰りたいか、変わりはったと思われる国に行っていつの者にも会いたいか口には言えません。私は帰るわけにはいかないのです。私はビルマの山河に散らばっている同胞の屍を残して帰ることができなくなったのです。
Mizushima's letters leave his comrades both devastated and deeply moved by his spiritual resolve to remain in Burma. Later on, the soldiers quickly shift to talking about families, jobs, and the comforts awaiting them at home. We then pan to one soldier, his expression quiet yet heavy. This moment offers the audience one final lingering connection to Mizushima. The final shot of the movie shows our protagonist, now a full Buddhist monk, walking away from all worldly ties, choosing the path of liberation. So, the black and white cinematography, it gives the film a somber, timeless quality that perfectly aligns with its meditative tone. And the landscapes, the mountain peaks, the barren flatlands, the seashore, the banks of the river, they're captured with a haunting, almost ephemeral beauty. And Mitsushima is basically pitted against nature in all these scenes. He's a tiny figure placed in wide-angle shots of the Burmese countryside. He's bruised, he's starving, and he's exhausted. And he keeps collecting these corpses as a way of redemption in a way. The film also masterfully plays around with perspective a lot. Like a lot of the times I was watching the movie, there are so many wide angle shots of the landscape or close-up shots of the characters. Like I especially like that shot of Mitsushima walking across the bridge with like a hill in the background and like a pagoda in the far background. And I also love the final shot, like one of the final scenes in the movie, where we get to see a close-up shot of one of the soldiers shedding a single tear as Captain Inoue was reading out Mitsushima's letter to his platoon. And it's worth noting that most of the scenes of this movie was filmed in Japan, specifically in Yasui, Hakone, and the Itsu Peninsula. But they did film key scenes at Shwedagon Pagoda. So most of the landscape clearly did not resemble Burma. Burma is a tropical country. It's very dense with like forest and hills. Honestly, the Burmese accent in the movie is very impressive. Massive kudos to the actors for capturing the nuances and cadence of the Burmese language itself. Burmese, in my opinion, it's notoriously hard to learn. They did a fantastic job at the realism. Like even when Mitsushima was walking across the landscape, starving, you could clearly see that his robes were tattered and torn. And notably, the film was one of the earliest movies to portray the impact of war from the Japanese soldiers' point of view. It also received international recognition. I believe it was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the 29th Academy Awards. One of my favorite quotes from the Burmese Harp comes from Mitsushima's letter to his comrades. Mitsushima's enlightenment is what drives his inner pilgrimage across the Burmese countryside. It's the reason why he turned back right after he played the harp in front of his comrades. It's also interesting how Mitsushima's perspective shifted after seeing the corpses and graves along his journey. In Buddhism, there's this concept, I wouldn't say concept, but there's this kind of deep existential shock factor that you feel. It's called samvega. It refers to this sudden, intense feeling for liberation, of this urgency to escape all of this suffering, all of this death and violence. And It normally arises when we're confronted with you could say, the ugliness of life. So for many Buddhists, Samvega is basically the turning point where we stop living on autopilot and we start discovering and learning and seeking the universal truth, the truth that life is inherently unsatisfactory. My main criticism of the Burmese Harp is that while it presents itself as an anti-war film, it problematically frames Japanese soldiers as the good guys, as the victims, without addressing the historical reality of their actions during the occupation of Burma by the Japanese army. The film's pacifist tone also sidesteps a lot of things. Like, for example, the British soldiers are portrayed as very lenient and compassionate and patient towards Japanese soldiers, and vice versa, which I don't think is what happened in real life. But all in all, the Burmese Harp, in my humble opinion, has one of the most visually striking and spiritually moving endings of any film that I've seen in a while. The movie at its core tells us about our capacity, our potential to attain enlightenment, to transcend our desires. It reminds Buddhists of the final goal, the summum bonum, so to speak, which is to break free from the wheel of samsara and to attain nibbana.